So in these two videos, we're looking at the two big strikes that we use and then we practice in the syllabus for our self-defense training. And again, we're just going to recap why we use these two strikes and the kind of benefits that we can get from using these strikes as opposed to knuckle strikes. First one is when we're looking at, today we're going to look at the hammer fist. Hammer fist and the back fist are very similar, both in the body mechanics that we use and also the different areas of the arm that we can strike with. And again, it's a gross motor movement. It's something that uses very natural body mechanics. And we say about natural body mechanics, it's a very similar movement that we would use when we were throwing. Right, so it generates lots of natural power. They're very quick to learn in comparison to fine motor movements, certainly certain knuckle strikes. And then the other benefit with the hammer fist is we look at the different surface area that we can use to strike with. And going back on the thing of it being a gross motor movement, if we're in times of stress or duress or conflict, which again is going to cause adrenaline, it's going to be very difficult for us to use, or much more difficult, depending on our level of training, to use fine motor movements. So the hammer fist and the back fist are very good. They help us to avoid the knuckles, so we're less likely to damage the knuckles and the wrist. Increases the surface area that we can use to strike with, and employs really good natural body mechanics. And if we look at the hammer fist, we kind of already know how to do this because it's very similar to throwing. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at, first of all, we're going to look at isolating the strike before we look at how we can then employ different strategies within our self-defense training. Get the strike right, then we can start to layer it with different scenario-based training or movement, adding a bit more movement in. And then, one thing that we look at a lot is employing these verbal and physical boundaries and protecting this personal space. So we look at the technique, understand the technique, how we can develop the technique, and then we can look at how we can piece it together. And in other videos, we're going to look at how we can then blend maybe what we call the conventional strikes, the boxing style strikes, with these figure of 8 hammer fist and back fist. So James just going to demonstrate the hammer fist for us. So if we look at this as well, before we go into two set stances, just to develop this figure of 8 type movement, we talk of figure of 8 and it's going to hit on a downward angle as opposed to hitting on a kind of linear plane here. So just start off nice and relaxed. And with these strikes, the more relaxed you are, the more weight we get into the strike and the more we can increase the speed in the strike as well. So tension's the killer when it comes to generating power in these strikes. That's it, there we go. And if you just watch, James, if you do it slowly, watch the body mechanics. It's very, very similar to if he was going to throw a ball. And if we look at, using it as an example, any form of throwing, whether it's a ball, whether it's a javelin, whether it's something heavier, we're going to be working up through the hips and generating that whip out through the arm. Because he's not got weight in his arm, it's going to allow him to generate the whip. And if we look at a whip, the crack comes from the increasing speed at the end of the strike. So the hammer fist, we can train hammer fist in a different way, but on this figure of 8, he's just going to use it in a very similar way to a whip. And again, and again, and again. That's it. So just nice and steady. Then what we can look to do is increase the speed within the strike. And we can keep the hammer fist on a kind of circular movement here if we move forwards, but we can also make it on more of a figure of 8. And again, even though James is hitting with the hand at the moment, if I come in and I'm closer and he does the same movement, he could be hitting using the arm, even to a point where I'm even closer, where he's making contact with the elbow first. Right? So here's the hammer fist. So nice and relaxed, James. That's it. Now a bit more speed and a bit more power. Nice. And again. So, a very useful strike to be able to learn for self-defense. It's an accelerated learning process because it's movements that we're more familiar with. It can allow us to increase the surface area of the strike depending on range. It's a gross motor movement, so we're going to be more likely to be able to rely on it during times of stress or when we're adrenalised. And it just makes use of those natural good body mechanics which allows us to generate huge amounts of power within the movement. And again, what we'll look at is how we can use and blend these with the conventional strikes, but hammer fist and the back fist can be used to cover 360 degrees, much more easily. If you look at it as well, through training this kind of work with the approach with Guru Eddie Quinn. If your life depends on it, you're going to be using as much as you can your best tool. You know, you're not going to really, if you can, you're going to want the most powerful tool you've got. So can we generate those big strikes using the same arm, which we're then, because of the nature of the hammer fist and the back fist and how they work together, it can be just a constant flow of really powerful strikes, and we can use them in, you know, a 360-degree environment as well, whilst using our covers. Right, so that's the hammer fist, some key coaching points and the benefits of using it for self-defense.